Go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 1, verse 18. And we're going to walk through the Christmas story this morning. And I've titled the message today, Christmas, a story of fears and fulfillment. And there's something really interesting happening here in this story and in this time of year for us, right? It's the end of the year. Every year what happens is we pull into the Christmas story within a week of transitioning into a new year, right? So there's a lot happening in this little time slot for all of us every year at this moment. And so what's about to happen for us that many of us are in touch with, that Christmas provides a little bit of a distraction from, a little bit of a break from, is we're about to transition our life from 2016 with all that went on. And for some of us, what went on in 2016 was troubling, challenging, disappointing, full of questions, maybe conflicts, issues that still have not been resolved, questions that we'd love to have answers for as to why? Why did this happen and why did that happen? And there's a reality that, January's coming here and we're going to transition and many of us are going to take 2016's challenging issues with us into 2017, aren't we? Just because the calendar changes doesn't mean it's like problems and people and difficulties all of a sudden. Well, it's 2017. I guess the expiration date ran out on that issue. They just go with us into the next year. And isn't that what all the kind of the famous Christmas movies kind of have in it? Right? It's a Wonderful Life is severe, troubling situations that get interrupted by the news of Christmas. And somehow the news touches that situation and it changes it somehow. Well, that's what we have right now. We're here Christmas Eve. The Christmas story is interrupting our noisy, challenging, questionable lives. And it's interrupting it with hope. It interrupts it with the news that God, who had been promising something from long, long ago, has fulfilled exactly what he said. Because that's the kind of God he is. He's a God who is with us in our trouble, fulfilling things that he had promised to do in our lives. And so that brings something to us in this moment, doesn't it? So no matter how old you are here today, you're going to transition into a coming year, and there's this news of a God who's going to go with you. He's been with you, and he's a God who fulfills his purpose in our lives. So I want to make you aware of two things as we read through some of the story here this morning of the Christmas story. This is kind of like shopping for ingredients and something that you're about to eat. I'm going to make you aware of what you're about to bite into here. Two things I want you to listen for. Right? I love to do this. My wife likes to experiment with food, and I love her experimentation because it's like she can do something for the first time and it's perfect. But I love to eat it and try and figure out what's in it. So, does it have this? Does it have this? In it? Well, two flavors you're going to taste, and you can't miss these, is in this story, you're going to taste fulfillment over and over and over again. God is fulfilling something. But you're also going to taste fear over and over and over again. So while God is fulfilling something, people are experiencing fears. That's an interesting combination, right? Something for us to be aware of as we live our own lives. Let's learn something about God and his ways here. Verse 18 of chapter 1. Now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother, Mary, had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. So here's an interesting combination, right? God is breaking into the human story, fulfilling something, right? That's what the passage says. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said. So a fulfillment of something God, and we can say that's always been in the mind of God, but we get clued into it even way back in the Garden of Eden. When sin makes its appearance and the human story hits bumps and the wheels start to come off and problems now enter into our story. From that moment, God foresees the seed of the woman. The God who would come in the form of man, born of a woman. And everything in the Bible is leading up to this moment, right? This story that we celebrate this time of year, the whole Bible is focusing on this storyline. Not just the incarnation, but obviously the incarnation leads us to the cross and the resurrection. So it is a part of this massive thing that God has been doing that occupies the heart and mind of God above anything and everything else that would ever take place. Right, Galatians chapter 4 says, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of woman." This is a great story, but there's theology all trapped up inside this story, right? The rest of Galatians says, "Born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons." So this story doesn't just end with a cool scene in the manger. It is the story of redemption. It is God bringing us back into relationship with himself. And that this is God waiting for this to happen. There is this sense that all of heaven looks on. And then this news comes that this young girl, Mary, she's with child by the Holy Spirit. Suddenly, I don't know if heaven, they're not paying attention at any moment, but suddenly there is this sense in heaven, it's begun. It's here. It started. Finally. And there's rejoicing, and there's a choir of angels that are singing, and they're making proclamation and announcements. Behold, we bring you tidings of great joy. That's not how Joseph received the news. Right? You see the storyline for Joseph is a little bit different, right? Long anticipated rejoicing is happening in heaven. Sudden, unexpected freak out is happening on earth. Right? Listen, how does this story go for him? Her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. He is going to divorce this woman that he is betrothed to. He's engaged to. And to break an engagement back then, you had to actually go through a divorce process. So he obviously doesn't get what's going on here, does he? The peace that he knows, which is what God's doing, right? This is what God's doing. It just told us that. She is with child by the Holy Spirit. So we know this is God at work. But Joseph doesn't know that yet. All he knows is this is awful. This woman I was about to marry, that I have trusted, that I thought I knew. So he's personally hurt by what God has done. Ever feel hurt by what God has done? Ever find yourself without all the information and God has done something and you feel hurt by it? Well, that's Joseph. And then he starts to think. He starts to make a plan. Hey, you guys, we're living life. We got to have a plan. And then he starts thinking, hey, it's not just me being hurt. She's going to be totally shamed. This goes public, and I take her before the council and make her sin public. So now he's thinking, how do I work it? How do I fix this? What do I do? He's panicking. See, you and I know this story from a very different perspective, don't we? We don't come to the Christmas story freaking out. We don't come panicking. We don't come, oh my gosh, this is awful. What on earth are we going to do? We come rejoicing. See, because we see the story from heaven's perspective. But isn't it interesting that while in heaven, God is fulfilling what he has long promised to do for the good of humanity, on earth, the people are full of fear. Even the people that are following God. This is a man who loves God. And he loves this woman. He wants to protect her from what she did. See, so you can be in the midst of God doing something. God is doing something here. He is fulfilling something. And this man is terribly afraid of the circumstances that just got created by what God is doing in his life. Now, he's not the only person we're going to bump into who's got some fear problems while God is fulfilling some things. Looking further in chapter 2, verse 1. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who was born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written by the prophet, 'And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel.'" All right, so there's a place and a time for God to show up. And that's always true. Right? God's always showing up in places and times. And he picks Bethlehem. Not only does he pick Bethlehem, he prophesies. He promises. He says this is where it's going down. It's going down in Bethlehem of Judea. And when this takes place in Bethlehem of Judea, it is a fulfillment of what God had promised. So God has shown up. He has given a bit of a roadmap. There's something to be believed. And he fulfills what he promises. But yet here's another human being who, while God is fulfilling what he promises, he's not excited about this. Herod is not jumping for joy and rejoicing. Now what's interesting here, because this is an interesting revelation for us, because Herod's transitioning into the next year with some heart issues that he needs to be aware of. Because the same news that gets announced to the Magi, verse down in verse 10, a little bit later, the Magi who have gone looking for the star and the child, when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. So here the same story comes to two sets of people. You get the Magi who hear the story and they rejoice because they get it. They see fulfillment. God is breaking in now and fulfilling his promise. Herod doesn't see that though, does he? What does Herod see? This is an interesting thing. I know Herod's a big bad guy here, but let's face it, there's a little bit of Herod in all of us. What did Herod see? Herod saw Judea. Herod saw his reign. Herod saw his own interest. Herod saw his life that he thought he had control of, that he had a purpose for. So when God invades and says, hey, there's a new king in town, he's not interested because he wants to be king. And guess what? When you want to be king, when God's going to be king, when God breaks into your story, you're going to be just like Herod. You are going to be troubled, fearful. This man becomes afraid. Can you imagine? The good God of the universe who had promised to rescue humanity from its misery, and this man is afraid of what God is doing. Can you imagine being afraid of what God is doing? I know that was nobody's experience in 2016, right? This guy is protecting his own territory from God. I can relate. Right? Now listen, he's lost sight of all that's happening here, right? He doesn't see the whole picture, which is what we do. We lose sight of all that God is doing. God is redeeming, God is rescuing, God is restoring. But he's not seeing that. He's just seeing an invasion of his territory. He's just seeing God's plan, whatever it is going to disrupt the plan that I have. I've got a plan in my life. Thank you very much. And God's plan is intruding on it. And I'm afraid, and I'm going to take action against it. Well, this isn't the only moment of fear in this passage. Keep eating, right? You eating your Christmas cake with me? You taste it? Fulfillment and fear, fulfillment and fear. Verse 13. Now, when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. This is not how many of y'all go on vacation, you call it fleeing? Right? This is not a pleasant trip here. This is run for your life. Flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to what? Fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. All right, so from heaven's perspective, God sitting on the throne, in this moment, God is simply fulfilling. He made a promise, he predicted, he said this is what will happen, and he is just fulfilling that now. But when we zoom down on earth, the people cooperating with God in this moment are running for their lives. They have been informed of danger. They are not just packing up and heading somewhere else. They are fleeing. Right? That's a rich word, this word flee. It means to flee away, to seek safety by flight. Now, isn't that interesting? How many of you would have ever thought that God is on the move in your life, as he is here, and you feel unsafe? Have you ever put those two things together? When God moves in your life, you're going to suddenly feel unsafe. Really? That's how this works? Isn't it interesting how we can overlook some of these things in the Bible? Right? I mean, you can't help but see here, every time God moves to fulfill his purpose, the people in the story get afraid. Does that make you feel human? I relate. Right? These are heroic cast of characters. Right? These are the guys we're still talking about 2,000 years later. They're not going to be talking about me 2,000 years from now. But they're still talking about Joseph and Mary, who received God's plan into their life. They knew God was at work. They knew this was miraculous. Angels had visited with them and revealed things to them. But there comes a moment when they get threatened again. And, it's not like there's a switch somewhere that they just say, hey, I had a visit with an angel and I just turned this fear switch off. It'll never come back on again, ever in my life. It's off. God has done something in my life and I'll never ever be afraid. They're afraid in this moment. And you know what's really interesting here? Because this is where sometimes God is at work in our lives. And we don't recognize that sometimes when God is at work, he uses human means and human elements to actually accomplish what he's doing in us. So in a strange way, do you know why they went to Egypt? Because they felt unsafe where they were. It was actually their fear that made them pack up and get in agreement with God and go where God wanted them to be to fulfill his purpose. Isn't that interesting? See, these things pop into our lives as we're walking with God, and sometimes we just think, man, we are missing it here. We are totally out of bounds here because, I'm experiencing some insecurity. I'm experiencing some sense of unsafety. Right? Young and old, I live on a quest for safety, right? I want my life to feel safe. I want my checkbook to feel safe. I want my health to feel safe. I want my family to feel safe. I want everything to feel safe, which in my word means comfortable and predictable goodness in the future. And yet God is about to fulfill some things ahead of me. There's calendar stuff coming up where God's going to fulfill some things. And God forbid he breaks into my story like this. And I get to feel unsafe. And my sense of unsafeness makes me move in 2017 from here over to this little place called Egypt so that God can fulfill what it was that he was intending to do in my life. God's the one who announces to them this. Well, actually, I'm not sure he even announces to them. He announces to us that he's fulfilling a plan. They're just running for their lives. I don't know that they're sitting down saying, "Oh, I bet this is so that God can fulfill that Egypt thing." They may just be saying, "We need to get the heck out of here." Herod's on his way, and we need to get going right now. Pack up, we're gone. Where are we going? I don't know. I think we're going to Egypt. And yet they were in God's plan in that moment. You guys had enough taste of fear yet? It's still in the story. Keep going. Verse 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old or younger, which, asterisk here, that might give you a clue as to when the Magi actually visited the child. Probably not an infant, probably 1 to 2 years old by the time they get to him. According to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. Here is God again fulfilling his purpose in this setting. And it's move from heaven, fulfill God's purpose, but on earth, you got a guy named Herod who is enraged because he's afraid. This is not fury for no reason. This is fury from a person backed into a corner and poked in a cage, and he comes out crazy, attacking, destroying. All right, so here's fear. And what about the fear of the people? Here's the people of Israel who live in Ramah, who hear of this. Listen, this is one of those things that, who can explain this outbreak of sheer terror in the midst of God's people? But it's right in the middle of God fulfilling his purpose in their lives. And then we're not done with fear even yet, or fulfillment. Look in verse 19. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. And he rose, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled. He shall be called a Nazarene. How does Jesus end up being raised in a place called Nazareth in order to fulfill a prophecy and a promise that God made? Do you know how they ended up in Nazareth according to this passage? By being afraid of Archelaus. And it's not clear where Joseph actually is from. He travels from Nazareth to Bethlehem for the census. Some folks believe that he could have been from Bethlehem, and Mary actually was in Galilee. So he goes to get her and bring her to where the census can take place. So it's not clear where he's from exactly. But from this passage, it seems clear that their intention was to go back to the region where Herod and his family had power, until he is warned by the angel and he hears of Archelaus, and he's more than happy to go somewhere else because he's afraid of this man. What's interesting in this story is, I so relate to these people. How many times do you have to encounter God and still be afraid? They've been directed by God. They've been rescued by God. There's been a miraculous birth. A miracle is taking place. The fulfillment of the ages is happening in your family. And yet, Archelaus is ruling in his father's place. And I'm afraid. This is me, isn't it? Is it you? It's like God does all this amazing stuff in our lives. And yet the next time I need to trust him, I'm afraid. And I don't confront that situation with confidence and a sense of boldness and God is with me. I identify with these people. And so here's what's interesting. Eric, you can go ahead and come back up here. Here's what's an interesting thing for us. Here we are transitioning from 2016 to 2017. And your story gets interrupted by the Christmas story. You get a little bit of a break, hectic pace, shopping, getting together with family, celebrating traditions that mean something to us. But when 2017 starts, you're going to go back to life as it is. And whatever trouble was there at the beginning of December, it will more than likely be there at the beginning of January, waiting for you. Whatever fears and questions and uncertainties were traveling with you with your journey in 2016, they're going to be waiting for you as you start 2017. And what is it that will rescue us in the moment of our fears? Well, it is an awareness that you and I are following a God, relating to a God who is right now actively fulfilling his purpose. And he's doing that in my life right now. And can you join the chorus of the folks in this story? He may be way ahead of you and hadn't told you yet. Maybe you hadn't had the angel show up in your life and tell you, hey, listen, all this trouble, the pregnancy thing, all that stuff, it was me. I was behind all that. You haven't had God break into your story yet and tell you that's what he's doing. Now, do you believe that he's a yet God, that he actually is going to do something like that when the time is right? You realize God could have had a little earlier meeting with Joseph, couldn't he? Hey, Joseph, you're going to meet this really great gal named Mary. This is how it's going to unfold. I mean, come on, God, show up back then. Like, suddenly she's going to become pregnant. Don't freak out. It's me, okay? But God doesn't do that. God lets the story just unfold. He lets it go far enough to where Joseph can go into full freak out mode and panic. Make other plans. And then God steps in and says, no. Your plan, that's not my plan. You're not going to divorce her. That's not what I have. This guy's already been thinking all this stuff. Listen, you and I are about to transition into a new year. And there's new stuff coming. Many opportunities await us to believe that the God who fulfilled his purposes in the past is still the God who fulfills his purposes today. And he's made promises to us that he is eager to fulfill. The Lord who tells the people in exile, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. We quote that verse, we forget where it comes from. It's a word spoken when Jerusalem has been burned to the ground and the exile have been taken miles and miles away and they have no idea how they're ever getting back to the land that God has promised them. And God says, hey, you remember this. I know the plans I have for you. Plans for a future and a hope, not for evil. Let me just remind you of that. We jump all the way into the New Testament and God still speaks to his people that way. It says, for it is God who causes all things to work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Now, let me close with this thought because I don't know who you identify with this morning in this story. You could be here, and I don't want to make this just a nice, cute Christmas message, because you could be here this morning about to head into 2017, and you're more like Herod than you are Joseph. And if God bursts into your life with a plan for his purpose to be fulfilled, and it competes with your purpose being fulfilled, you're going to become furious. In some way. You're going to feel defrauded by God. You're going to feel like God did something in your life. Who does he think he is? God's not a good God. How could I possibly serve a God like that? Listen, the reason why you're furious is the same reason why Herod was furious. He had a plan and he had a purpose for his own glory. And God's purpose interfered with his purpose. And you may be concluding 2016 having gone 15 rounds of boxing with God because God's been trying to do something in your life and you've been greeting it like it's going to interrupt your plan. Well, can I just tell you, it is going to interrupt your plan. And at some point, I thank God for this, at some point in my life, God introduced me to just how foolish my plan was. And just how wise and perfect and good his plan was. Even if it means unpredictable circumstances. Even if it means moments where I'm going to feel unsafe and I'm going to have to run for cover. His plan is better than mine. So maybe in here, you're finishing 2016. I want to give you a way out of that dilemma. This story we're celebrating at this time of year, it is God intruding into our world. But it's not just a story of a baby in a manger. It's a story of a human who was God needing a container like this one to live a perfect life that nobody else could live. To go all the way to a cross where he would yield his life as a sacrifice and shed his blood for the forgiveness of sins. To accomplish one thing. To restore us to God. And if he had not come and done that, there's not a one of us in here who could have ever been restored to God. So if you're finding yourself with your own purpose and your own plan for life and you're mad at God and you've been shaking your fist all 2016, it might be that you have never yielded your life to God's plan. You've never come to the place in your life where you've said, Jesus Christ came to restore me to the Father. And I want that and I need that. Well, can I just tell you, you can do that this morning. Before you go into another year, you can hoist your heart to God in prayer right now and say, God, I don't want to be at odds with you. And I don't want to write my own story. You created me and you have a purpose for my life. I want that purpose in my life. So I'm going to entrust my life to you today. I'm going to believe on you and I'm going to turn to you for the forgiveness of my sins and to give me a way through this life to lead me from this day forward. Let me pray for you if that's where you are this morning. And you want to do that. You can end this year and you really will have a different year. I promise you, you will have a totally different year in the year 2017 when God comes on the scene that way. So let's bow our heads together for a moment. If you'd like to start a new year and start a new life, stop fighting with God, you'd like to give your life over to him this morning, tell him that. Here, just pray something like this toward him. You speak to God these words. Lord Jesus, I have been living my life my own way. I've had goals and dreams and desires. And I guess I thought you were there to make all those things come true. But God, today I recognize you have a plan and you have a purpose. And you're calling me to be a part of that. So this morning, God, I yield my life to you. I don't want to be at odds with you. I don't want to live my life my own way. I want to live for the purpose you have for me. So this morning, I recognize Jesus Christ came for a reason. To shed his blood, to forgive my sins. Lord, forgive me this morning. Because of what he did for me, forgive me. And he came to restore me to you, to have the life you wanted me to have. So God, this morning, I receive that life. I turn to you in trust. And I'm going to follow you. Like Mary and Joseph followed you. They wandered around, it looked like, but they were following your plan. And from this moment on, I will go where you lead me. I will live for your purpose and for your plan. Lord, I pray for those who are here this morning who find themselves like Mary and Joseph. God, they're not resisting you. They're trying to follow you. But there are moments, Lord, when your plan seems like it's way out ahead of them. And you jump in and circumstances change and needs come and questions come. And it feels like it's unsafe. It feels scary. Lord, there are followers of yours in this room this morning who are going to close this year out feeling like they're buried in uncertainty, full of questions. What is going on? Why is this happening? And Lord, I pray that this story illumines, it lets us behind the scene to see. Lord, even in the moments where it feels unsafe for us, you are at work. You are directing us. That unsafeness, that sense of fear, it's compelling us to go to a place where you're going to fulfill your purpose for us. So God, I thank you that happened for Mary and Joseph when they got it and when they didn't get it. You are so good. God, I thank you that you're at work in my life, whether I've figured it out or not, whether I know to go to that unsafe situation or not, whether I know to take steps toward an Egypt or to go live in Galilee or not. God, you are at work. How faithful are you? God, thank you for awakening our souls as we come into a new year in this moment to see that this story, this Christmas story, it's all about a God who will fulfill what he has promised to do. Even when the people he's dealing with don't always get it. God, that helps me because I don't always get it. And I know many of us here don't always get it. But you have gone ahead of us. And you will be faithful to us in 2017 for the sake of your glory.